Content warnings for eye strain graphics, trypophobia, death, murder, and cremation. Also, spoilers ahead for the whole game. Given the nature of the game, it made the most sense to me to analyze the narrative throughout the whole video. The space between begins with a murder, and it ends with love. Or maybe it begins with love and ends with a murder. I suppose the interpretation is up to you, really. Remember my analysis video about Time is Solid here, where I said that I wanted to explore games about liminal spaces, about places where the veil is thin. Well, The Space Between is a game about liminal spaces, but here the veil is not thin. Instead, the veil is a thick shroud, an impassable barrier that separates people. The Space Between is a three-dimensional visual novel about the space between one person and another, a space that divides as much as it connects. In fact, more than being just a weird indie game, I would argue that it is also a three-dimensional poem. Let me explain. The Space Between is a visual novel, which means it is a game where the primary experience comes through the text and minimal images. By minimal, I mean that this is not a AAA open-world game with photorealistic graphics. Most visual novels use still 2D images, sometimes with minimal animations. Think of the Doki Doki Literature Club. Some visual novels also include 3D art as well, such as the Danganronpa series. Some visual novels allow the player to choose actions from a series of choices to affect the outcome of the story, while others are kinetic, meaning that there are no choices, only the experience of living out one particular story. The Space Between is a kinetic novel set entirely in a 3D space, allowing the player to experience one story while exploring a larger space. And I must say, the visuals are gorgeous. I love PSX-style graphics like this. Well, that explains the three-dimensional part. The poem part is a little more complicated. The game opens with a news report. The body of Martin Melanson, an architect, was found buried in the walls of the new Bright Hall Theater, his last building. The police cannot rule out the possibility that he was murdered. They are currently investigating the people in his close environment. After the news report scrolls away, the prologue to our story begins. We open in a blanket fort, supported by two large chairs facing each other. As we crawl forward, a simple prompt appears on screen. When we press E, the dialogue begins. There are no dialogue tags, meaning that we can't always be sure who is speaking. Are we speaking to Martin? Or is the person behind the curtain speaking to us? In this case, however, we soon learn that we are Martin, and that it is Daniel, our childhood friend, speaking to us. The dialogue stays on the screen for a long time. There is no way to skip it. There is no way to click through it at your own pace, to reread any parts you may have missed. When I first played this game, I found it very annoying. Why couldn't I read through the text at my own pace, whether fast or slow? Why couldn't I reread any parts I may have missed? I found it especially annoying because it was a game I paid for, and because it was advertised as a visual novel. Most visual novels offer a backlog that you can scroll through to reread past dialogue. The player's movement speed is slow as well, as if Martin walks by shuffling his feet, or as if the environment is much larger than we could have believed otherwise. However, these flaws are not symptoms of the creator's lack of skill, but rather a deliberate choice on the creator's part. He wants the game to be slow. He wants you to pay attention to what's being said. What Christopher, the developer of the game, has done is set the pace for how the game is played. This is the first explanation for how this game is like a poem. One of the main characteristics of poetry is its pace and rhythm. Poems like "We Real Cool" are designed to be read at a quick, steady beat, while other poems are meant to be read more slowly. Another significant characteristic of poetry is the use of repetition to create emphasis and symbolism. In poetry, this repetition is conveyed through words, but the space between uses both the dialogue and the visual environment. Daniel asks us to place our hand on the blanket in front of us. While he does the same, he asks, "Do you feel my hand or the curtain?" And we, Martin, respond, "Both, I guess." It is this question and answer that form the basis for the rest of the game. Our world shifts again, and now Martin is an adult standing outside an apartment complex at night. The windows form a checkerboard of light and dark against the imposing wall. In front of the apartment's entrance stands a strange woman. She asks Martin if he lives there. He asks if she's been watching him, and she says, "No, not really, but I noticed you." He responds in an equally cryptic manner, "To notice me, your lights had to be off." At last, she introduces herself. "Yes, with the lights on, I would only see my reflection. I am Clara." I think it is significant that her name means light. She asks which of the apartments belongs to Martin, and the camera suddenly shifts to focus on one window in particular. Light pours through the pane, and below it flutters a curtain. Within the room, a closed door can be seen. The scene changes again, and now Martin is sitting on a bench with Clara, near some clotheslines where blankets hang. He tells her that he is an architect, but she is confused. Why would he choose to be a builder of walls? His response is as odd as her question. Sometimes walls don't have to be out of matter. It is here that the prologue ends. The game has now established every symbol, every phrase, and nearly every theme that it plans to explore through the following 3 acts. Curtains, shrouds, 2 chairs facing each other, a square of light piercing the darkness, and a closed door. Do you feel my hand or the curtain? Sometimes walls don't have to be out of matter. Already we feel a profound sense of isolation that makes closeness feel even more special. At the start, Martin is a child playing a game with Daniel, but we never see Daniel. He is shrouded behind a blanket. Then we meet Clara, a strange woman half hidden by the shadow of the apartment building, speaking in riddles, until at last we see her in the light, sitting close to us on a bench. Even then, there is a sense of separation in the cryptic dialogue between Martin and Clara. Who are we closer to? The boy we never see, or the woman we can never truly know? Does the distinction really matter? Act 1 begins in Martin's workshop. We see Clara looking at the plans and models for the theater he is constructing. She says, "It is hard not to identify with their work, right?" He agrees, saying that it is hard for him to let go, But then he says that he doesn't have to let go of them because he has built himself a room inside each of them to live in, even inside the theater. Here, the game draws a parallel between Martin and the theater. Martin identifies himself with his creations, so much so that even when it is time to leave them, he lingers with them. He lives inside them. The game enforces this parallel when Martin takes Clara on a tour of the theater. Like a person, the stage is unfinished, and yet, as Clara, or Martin, says, you can see what it is in seeing what it will be. And like a person, there are degrees of separation between the audience and the stage, the viewers and the actors. Even the orchestra is separated in a strange, in-between liminal space, where they are not quite actors and not quite the audience. How well can we know someone when we only know the performance they put on? And is that a bad thing when we as the audience are also performing? Once again, Martin asserts that walls don't have to be made out of matter, referencing the figurative fourth wall that separates the audience from the actors during a play. But then he, or Clara, continues this idea by saying, sometimes closeness comes through separation. I still don't know what this means, but I almost feel as though I do. That may just be wishful thinking on my part. As Clara approaches Martin on the stage, she asks, "Do you want to be close?" Martin is uncertain, saying that he has a hard time trusting others. It's difficult for him to push back the veil and let others into his life. Clara's persuasion wins out, however, and Martin offers to let Clara see the understage. The understage is less refined, with stark lighting and low ceilings. Clara comments how hollow, and yet not empty, the space is. The understage forms a liminal transitional space between the performance upstairs and the true self, represented by Martin's secret living space below. For the theater, the understage is the place where props are kept before being taken upstairs. But for Martin, the understage is the place where he decides what to reveal from his inner self to the outside world. Martin's living space is located down a few stairs from the understage hallway. It is a large, nearly empty room, with only 3 chairs, a few bare lights, and curtains hung around the walls. Clara seems to judge Martin for building a room for his ego to live in, saying it is narcissistic. Then, either Clara or Martin says, "If so, we could not be here together. But we are. I am glad we are here at this moment. I am glad we know each other." I can't tell who is speaking, but the meaning changes depending on who it is. If it's Martin, then he is being defensive of himself and his desire to be close. If it's Clara, then she is saying that they could not be close like they are right now if this room had not been built for Martin's ego. We then come to a brief interlude where either Martin or Clara says, "Do you know how they called the understage in the past? They called it hell." There is a certain horror when you sense that separation between yourself and another person. The fact that you can never truly know another person the way that they know themselves. There's a certain horror where you try to hide yourself deeper and deeper from the people you like, so that they don't ever see your true self. An image of a closed door briefly appears on screen before the opening of Act 2. Act 2 begins in a peaceful outdoor sanctuary. Within the sanctuary lies a coffin. Martin's childhood friend Daniel has died. He has passed beyond the veil. That special connection they had has been severed. Martin says, "I wish I could be close." This phrase recalls the murder from the beginning of the game. He watches Daniel's coffin slide into the cremator. The bright flames and square aperture reflect the imagery of the open apartment window from Act 1. The scene changes, and now Martin and Clara are lying together in bed in Martin's room. Martin bemoans the separation he feels between the people he wants to be closest to. He tells her about the game he used to play with Daniel. She asks if that is why he builds walls. One of them says, "I want to be close. You need to be separated." Martin and Clara then play the curtain game. But it's not enough. They want to be closer. Act 3 begins. In a desperate bid to be even closer to each other, Clara commits an act of violence. She cuts 2 holes in the veil. She violates that sacred space between 2 people by trying to force a deeper connection. The ominous snap of her scissors echoes in the desolate space. The separation between 2 people is part of being human. It is what makes us individual people. The veil is what allows us to develop relationships, to decide how close or how far we want to be. It connects as much as it divides. From here on out, the close intimacy of the previous 3 parts no longer exists. Clara disappears. Each scene becomes more disjointed, more ominous. I can't be sure what's happening in these moments. At one point, Martin sits in place of Daniel's coffin, slowly rolling into the cremator. Someone says, "I'm sorry, I can't do this. I love you. I don't know what to say. I thought this was helpful. Where are you at the moment?" Martin feels his way through the darkness, searching for Clara. At one point, he calls out for Daniel. It's as if he's forgotten which loved one he's looking for. He longs to be close. At last, he leaves the understage and wanders onto the stage proper, where 2 chairs sit facing each other, yet spaced far apart. There's a sudden flash, and now we see every repeated visual motif in the game. The chairs, the square of light, the closed door, and the curtain. And the game ends with a declaration of love. I love you. Did Clara murder Martin? Or was it a stranger? The space between explores the space between 2 people, physically, emotionally, and maybe even spiritually. It is a space that cannot be crossed or destroyed without dire consequences. But the separation isn't all bad. It is what allows us to keep our inner selves as a sacred space. It is what makes our connections so much more meaningful. It is a veil we cannot tear down.